Welcome to Strip Coverlet, where we squeeze the bigger picture of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and we are here for the 14th in about a 34-part series as we journey chapter by chapter through Fairy Tale by Stephen King. So what we've got here is we've got a comments section, then we've got a So What Happened, which is a recap of the story so far in this chapter, and then we've got a Lit Crit section, and finally, a Writer's Circle section. I'm still searching for what I want to call that Writer's Circle section of the video. If you have any favorites, let me know. If you have any suggestions, let me know in the comments below. But look, what is that? Somebody's backing up. Look, I forgot where I was at. So we're going to get started with the comments here. Mike talked about filtering. He mentioned that he had not really heard filtering talked about in that way, and I think, look, there's only a couple real big sins that a writer can commit. That was not someone backing up, it was someone trying to deliver someone else's mail to my apartment. For those who don't know, for the uninitiated, my apartment is number 209, the building is number 209. So anyone in the building who has something coming from FedEx, coming from UPS, coming from Amazon, it always gets dropped off at my doorstep because people always have their jobs. Now, what was I saying? Mike talked about filtering, and oh yeah, there are only a couple real big sins that a writer can commit in his or her writing. And the biggest one is robbing the reader of experience. And here's how filtering does that. So I talked a little bit about when you're filtering, okay, I don't have sunglasses. Okay, when you're reading a story, this is the writer's execution. These glasses here, boom. Writer's execution. Everything that happens in the story is already filtered. When you start filtering through another character, boom, there's a second pair of glasses. By filtering, by removing experience from the reader, you are killing what it is that literature actually does. Literature, so one of the keys to our evolution, look, you put us on an African savanna, we get eaten pretty fast. What we had to do was be smarter than everything there. Not faster, not bigger, not stronger, not tougher. We had to be smarter than everything. One of the ways that we were able to do that is to learn from other things' experience. Literature is a great way to learn through someone else's experience. Now, filtering might be a small way to distance the reader from that experience, but what it does is it adds cognitive dissonance. By removing the reader from the experience, I felt those teeth sink into my arm. Okay, we get that. We understand. That's not terrible writing by any means. The teeth broke my skin and the searing heat of blood ran down to my elbow. That's first person. You feel that. When you read it, you'll learn from it. So that is one of the things that I think, okay, the metaphor with the glasses. Don't think of it as glasses. Think of it as sunglasses. How much darker everything is if you were wearing two pairs of sunglasses. Now that I've stuttered through all of this, let's move on to the second comment, which is actually from PF, who commented on an earlier video, pardon me, in the series, when I was talking about some of the things that maybe Stephen King was drawing from in his own life in regards to this story. PF said he already used the truck wreck in the Dark Tower series, beating the same dead horses, including alcoholism. In super fairness to Stephen King, he's written like 1,000 books. So he'd run out of stuff if he didn't double dip. He would have run out of a lot of stuff by now if he didn't double dip. Second off, I am reminded of a lyric from the song Little One by Highly Suspect. They say, quote, "How long must I justify my pain through these songs?" This goes hand in hand with that first point. Literature is aimed at, maybe not aimed. In fact, I don't think that's fair. Literature exists, perhaps, in the same way that an atom bomb does. There's a blast radius. And if you see it, you're kind of screwed, right? That's what an atom bomb does. But with literature, the result of literature is that you gain experiences. The only way that a writer writes is by expressing the things that he or she has been through. Oftentimes, those things will be traumatic. And here's the thing. Maybe there are writers out there who do not write from their pain. And I don't think that you have to be psychologically aiming to write about your pain in order for it to work its way into your writing. Maybe there's someone out there who isn't. But if we're using quotes, if we're throwing around quotes, here's a quote from Hemingway. "No man is so lonely as the writer, but the suicide." Now, Papa knew a thing or two about both. So, let that stand for what it will, but I think that no one would actually dedicate such a large portion of their lives, and maybe this is worth examining if you find yourself considering yourself a writer. I don't think that anyone would condense as much of their life into the loneliness that is putting words on a page without that act being cathartic in some manner. It has to be good for something. Now, so what happened? Charlie talked to... She's not a gray girl. I thought she was a gray girl. I thought she was gray as well. It turns out that, what's her name? Leah, we are told how to say it. Leah is not gray. But he talks to her for an hour, and her name is Leah, and she asks him about his life. It turns out the folks in the town aren't just different, they've been disfigured. And we get on 236 and 237. This comes to us from Leah. Quote, "If you go there, you must be very quiet and follow Adrian's marks. And you must never, never go there at night. You were one of the whole people," to which Charlie responds, "Whole people?" She reached over the table to touch my forehead, one cheek, my nose, and my mouth. Her fingers were light, the touch fleeting. But more of those shocks went through me. And then on 237, as Leah is getting sustenance, she put the glass tube in the yellow gluck, then raised the index finger of her right hand to the red blemish, the only flaw in her beautiful skin. I saw that all of her nails except for the one on that finger had been trimmed short. She pushed the nail into the blemish until the nail disappeared. She pulled. The flesh opened and a rill of blood ran down from it to her jawline. She inserted the straw in the small hole she'd made, and her cheeks hollowed as she sucked up whatever she took for nourishment. So all of the people have been disfigured in this way, it seems, at least at this point in the story. And Leah used to live in that fancy part of town. She was a princess. She had some sisters and some brothers, all dead. And Leah tells Charlie to spend the night with Dora and then go to see her uncle, Leah's uncle. Charlie is lost in thought, considering options when the gray maid grabs him and tells him, help her. Now, there is some ambiguity at this point in the story because he had been thinking about Radar. And I was of the assumption during that part of the story that the maid was telling him to help Radar, meaning that the maid could read his thoughts. But we learn later in the chapter that Charlie is under the assumption that the maid said, help her, referring to Leia. Also, the place, so when he's on his way back, he runs into a shoeless couple where he gives them the shoes that Dora had told him to give to any people that did not have shoes. This is one of those details about a story that I'm not sure whether or not to put into the recap because it seems kind of worthless here, but I'm assuming it's going to come back. And that couple tells him that they are in a place called Empis, E-M-P-I-S. Also, there are wolvies who come out when the big moon and the little moon something. Hard to say. He goes back to Dora's and gets a night's sleep. So, moving on to the lit crit portion of this video. 236 here. Let me stop here and say I got some information from Leia by way of Falada. Falladio? But she got a hell of a lot more from me. She had a way about her, as if she were used to being obeyed. But it wasn't a mean or bullying way. There are people, well-bred people, who seem to realize they have an obligation to be pleasant and polite, and the obligation is double if they don't have to be. But pleasant or not, they usually get what they want. I talked a lot in my series on this channel about Absalom by William Faulkner, one of the series on this channel of which I am most proud, so if you consider picking up some Faulkner, maybe read along that with me. It's a chapter-by-chapter rundown. But nonetheless, regardless, I talked a lot in that series about the idea of great people. This is something that I think is mostly dead in our society. You don't see, and let me think a second about how to actually say this, because there is still the shadow of this thing going on. Okay, I got it. There is no such thing as hero worship, really, in our culture, but there is celebrity worship. What is the difference? I'm glad I came up with this on the spot. So, hero worship, you were accepting a three-dimensional person as great, but you are accepting them as a three-dimensional person, which means they're flawed. Celebrity worship, that person doesn't need to be great. That person needs to be famous. I'm going to skip the obvious... No, I'm not going to skip the obvious examples. Kim Kardashian may be an exquisite business person now. Kim Kardashian built her empire on being famous. So the easiest way to make an example of this is sport. Anyone who has built an empire off of sport has done it by being really good at something. Celebrity is not that way. Even so, I don't mean to pick on Kim Kardashian. We can do anyone in Hollywood. Brad Pitt, not particularly good at anything, has gotten better at acting over the years. Go back to his stuff from the 90s. Tell me he was a great actor. He was very good looking. He was famous for being very good looking. That's it. Bada bing, bada boom. He gets worshipped as a celebrity. There is this idea, however, deeply rooted in us, I believe, of great people. Think of the worship that still goes on about Elvis Presley. Say what you will about the politics, where he got his music, whatever it was. The way he performed that music during the time that he was performing that music was different than a lot of people had ever seen, and people found it entertaining. People found his vocals particularly compelling. They found the rhythm with which he sang very different. So this was not just, and he's still worshipped today. I mean, you can still go in how many stores in America and find a poster of Elvis. Now, when you're talking, I'm not going to get into that. I think this is something that was real big in the United States for the way it was big in the United States, because we didn't have it like they had it in Europe. In Europe, you had royalty. In ancient societies, you had heroes, what were known as heroes. There was something called hero battle. Throwing out Brad Pitt, if you go back and you watch Troy, I think it's at the very beginning of that movie, there is a battle scene where the generals say, hey, let's settle this in the ways of the ancients. My best guy, your best guy. And it becomes Achilles versus Boagrius. Boagrius is a big dude. Achilles goes ahead and kills him anyway. Spoilers. This makes him a hero. If you watch that movie, though, not a very likable guy. Not a very likable guy. But he's a hero. He's a great person. Here, in this story, the reason I talk about this is it seems like we are getting the royalty type of great person, which maybe is more the celebrity worship in Leia versus what is obviously shaping up to be a hero in Charlie. Are we going to get the marriage of celebrity worship and hero worship? It is yet to be seen to this point in the story. On 237, the kissing page to this, Charlie starts to ask Leia, what happened? I asked. What is G? And she slaps him. She slammed her palm against my mouth hard enough to drive it up against my lips up against my teeth. She shook her head. Never say his name, lest you speed his walking. Maybe we're going to get some magic after all. This seems to be a magical type of invocation. You don't in the physical world, you don't in the mundane world. Never in Charlie's world in this story would someone stop you from saying anyone's name. That is more of a magical type of transition. On 241, I'm going to poke at Stephen. I have to. Besides, show me a healthy teenage boy who doesn't want to be the hero of this story. One who helps the beautiful girl, and I'll show you no one at all. It's a bit presumptuous, isn't it, Stephen? It's a bit toxic masculinity, don't you think, Stephen? Don't you think? Just put it out there. I don't care. Just had to put it out there for some of the things that Stephen King says on his own time. On 242, we get an interesting exchange. This is the couple that I talked about in the So What Happened section. Charlie is on his way back from Leia's to Dora's, and he runs into a couple. Ho, he said, are we well met? If not, have what you would take. You have a weapon I have not, or I have none. I'm too tired and heart sore to fight you. I'm no robber, I said, just a traveler like you. The woman was wearing short lace-up boots that looked dusty but whole. The man's feet were bare and dirty. Are you the one the lady with the dog told us we might meet? Now, this is a small interaction that tells us something that intuitively perhaps we should have known. This interaction, these strangers Don't know who Charlie is. Don't know who Dora is. She's the lady with the dog. Don't really know where they're going. And they accept that Charlie, because he has a gun, might be dangerous and might be robbing people. We've heard none of that in this story. He doesn't look like a soldier. The soldiers are the only roaming bands of psychopaths that we've heard about so far. This little interaction, this is something that is expertly done by King here. This little interaction tells us the world that we're in is much bigger than we've seen so far. Sure, maybe we could intuit that, but the way that we have gotten to this place from the regular story that is going on does not ensure us that the world in which we find ourselves is as expansive as the world from which Charlie comes. This interaction puts us a little closer to that scale. So this tells us a little more assuredly that we are dealing with a world that is on scale, maybe, with ours. Now, moving on to the Writer's Circle portion of this video, I want to go way back to 233, the very opening of the chapter. And I've only got 2 writing points here, but I think they're fairly substantial ones. This is a trick. This is a pitfall that happens to a lot of writers. And this is one of the ways that I think I can tell Stephen King was putting on the fantasy mask. What do I mean by that? Stephen King's a horror guy. We know that. Stephen King knows that. The whole world knows that. I talked in episode 2, I think it was, about Varun, who was commenting all the way from India. In India, he knows Stephen King writes horror. In order to put on another show, in order to give us something that we were not expecting, in order to give us something that is not immediately within his wheelhouse, he has to trump himself up. All writers do it. If you put, I'm going to use a sports phrase, if you put a wide receiver at quarterback, he will not be playing quarterback. He will be playing quarterbacks that he has seen. He will be doing things that he thinks a quarterback should do. Here we have Stephen King, the horror guy, synonymous with horror fiction, writing fantasy. It seems so far. It doesn't seem we're going to get any horror in here at all. This seems straight fantasy so far. Seems like we're going in a straight fantasy direction. So instead of sitting down at the typewriter or wherever it is that Stephen King writes and just going to town, he has to get himself in that place and say, okay, I'm writing chapter 14. What am I doing in chapter 14? We've got Charlie. We've got Leia. We're going to talk for a little bit. He's going to go off. And that's how these chapters feel, right? It feels like a little formulaic. We've got boom, boom, boom. Setup, character moment, exit. Okay, fine. We can deal with that. What I can't deal with is this meta level of filtering. The very first thing that Stephen King tells us, we only talked for an hour, and I ended up doing most of it. But it was long enough for me to be sure that she was no ordinary farm girl. And then you give us the conversation where they talked for about an hour, and Charlie did most of the explaining, but he found out that Leia was no ordinary farm girl. Don't tell us that. You've filtered through your writer's voice into the character and then given us the scene. That is filtering of a sort, and it's spoiling the scene. Don't spoil the scene. Give us the scene. Make us live the scene. Make us experience the scene. And finally, on page 240 here, So we have the scene set up where Charlie is given the direction to go see Leia's uncle. And he's told how long it will be. Okay? And then we get this little scene here. A day to get to the uncle. If it was 20 miles, it might be a day more to get to the city. More likely, 2 or even 3. Counting the return to the underground corridor leading to the well, maybe 6 days in all. And that was assuming all went okay. By then, my father would be back and would have reported me missing. He'd be scared, and he might drink. I'd be gambling my father's sobriety against the life of a dog. Okay, we're raising the stakes. But here's the thing. In his 8 rules of creative writing, Kurt Vonnegut gives us a simple little ditty. It's the number 3 rule. Every character should want something, even if it's only a glass of water. The want from a character does a couple things. Number 1, want builds character because want tells us what is important to that character. If Charlie were just down here for gold, we would feel different about him than if he's down here to help Radar get younger. Wouldn't we? Maybe both are acceptable missions. But when you add another element, so want, the second thing that want does is it gives us story. We're here for story. Character's great. We're here for story. Want equals story. Here, we have consequence. If I don't get back in time, Dad is going to... If I don't get back in time, I might lose my father. Because if he turns back to the drink, he ain't coming back. So I've got losing my father on one end, losing the dog on another. This is consequence. So remember, want equals story. Want plus consequence equals suspense. Now, want plus consequence, remember those little numbers at the top? The power, raised to the power of? Want plus consequence raised to the power of hero, and we have action. What is action? Action is stuff you want to follow. Action gives us rooting interest. Want equals story. Story plus consequence. What did I say here? Oh, yeah. Story plus consequence equals expense. Suspense. I'm losing it, man. Story plus consequence raised to the power of hero equals action. That is all I have for this, the 14th chapter. I will be back on Wednesday with chapter 15 from Fairy Tale by Stephen King. And I hope to have all of you there and give me some comments to interact with, huh?